Starting today, the House Oversight Committee will hold a hearing on the widespread Minnesota fraud scandal.
So it comes as the focus shifts to the state attorney general.
Alexis McAdams joins us live from Minneapolis with the many details. Alexis.
That's right. A lot of details here because really, according to prosecutors, Brian, there's just so much fraud here in the state. Now they're looking at the state's Attorney General, Keith Ellison. Why? Because the state's top cop here in Minnesota was caught in an audio recording behind closed doors meeting with a group of soon-to-be convicted Somali fraudsters. They were asking the Attorney General for help to get more funding. Listen to this.
The only way we can protect what we have is by inserting ourselves into the political arena, putting our votes where it needs to be, but most importantly, putting our dollars in the right place and supporting candidates that will fight to protect our interests.
Let me just jump in here because when they're talking about putting their votes, we know what the Democrats do. They bring in refugees and underrepresented non-citizen groups into their sanctuary cities and states, and then they get their votes. But interestingly, and before we get to Ellison's reply, they're putting their dollars, and that's the key piece of this story, their dollars in the right place and supporting the candidates that'll fight for our interests. So what's come out in the last week to 10 days as far as the Somali interests in Minnesota and specifically in Minneapolis? Fraud. Fraud with their daycare centers, specifically their healthcare fraud. And this recording was actually done by this individual who's speaking on COVID fraud. So AG Ellison does have a lot of explaining to do because what's happening now with Donald Trump's Department of Justice is they're blasting in FBI agents, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Treasury, which is IRS, and the Department of Justice. All of them are taking a keen eye and a microscope to every amount of federal funding that the state has gotten. And now today, the House Republicans are holding a hearing. So this is a highly, highly visible state right now as to the fraud that's potentially happening. And Ellison, their top cop, is under the microscope big time.
That's right.
You can only protect our interests when we have your back, and you don't have to worry about who's behind you.
Interesting.
And also this group was talking about, as you heard there, supporting his campaign. So Keith Ellison is pushing back on this. He said that he takes fraud seriously. He shared in an op-ed writing this: "I took a meeting in good faith with people I didn't know, and some turned out to have done some bad things. I did nothing for them, and I took nothing from them." But some of those now convicted Somali fraudsters did donate money to Ellison's campaign, according to documents obtained by the Center for the American Experiment. Ellison reportedly later gave the money back because those people were convicted. Fox obtained the entire, pretty much almost an hour-long clip of this meeting, so there's so much in it. It's from the lawyer of this woman, Amy Bach. She was convicted in this massive Feeding Our Future scam. That's how it all started. Bach's behind bars, and her legal team says, where's the accountability for Governor Walz and the Attorney General? They knew that this was going on. He says nothing happened until the Fed stepped in. Do you think some of these politicians should be held accountable?
I would like to see someone in the state, I don't care whether it's the governor, I don't care whether it's the attorney general, someone take responsibility.
Well, that's exactly what's happening because Tim Walz just pulled out of his re-election campaign a year early here in the for the governor of Minnesota. I just did a story yesterday, though, with Amy Klobuchar, the senator from Minnesota, not only on what she knew and when she knew it, but ultimately what the plan is on her replacing Tim Walz. I'll put a link to that video up above because you are going to want to see that. So let's continue hearing what the lawyers for Bach want to see as far as accountability. Because the AG, Ilhan Omar, the House of Representatives individual for Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar, the senator, and Tim Walz, they are all under the federal microscope.
President Trump says Tim Walz was caught, quote, red-handed for his role in the fraudulent Somali scams plaguing Minnesota for more than a decade. Governor Walz is not running for re-election. He says he's going to take accountability, but the White House says that's not going to shield you from the investigation.
Exactly.
I'm not going anywhere. And you can make all your requests for me to resign over my dead body. Will that happen? I will fight this thing till the very end to make this state better. And
just look at his eyes and look at his appearance. He is freaking out. He knows what's coming. Because what also is not part of this story is that there were over 100 whistleblowers that worked for not only the state of Minnesota, but the city of Minneapolis that are blowing the whistle on their bringing this fraud to the Walz administration's attention years ago, and they did nothing. So Tim Walz, you can see it in his eyes, full-blown panic, because he knows what's coming.
The question that I think they need to decide is when did the guy in the White House resign?
Okay, so that's his response as this ongoing fraud scandal continues. The DOJ is going to send more prosecutors here to the state, which prosecutors on the ground have already said they needed because there's just so much fraud to investigate. Also, that audio clip that we just played for you, that's going to be mentioned in today's hearing. So it's something to keep an eye on with Ellison. Back to you.
All right, great job out there, Alexis. So when it comes to Attorney General, if you didn't know these people, why did you promise them that you were going to protect them?
Exactly.
Why did you take a meeting and tell those people that?
It wasn't just about taking the meeting, it was about what he said in the meeting. So he can have his alibi or his cover story that he didn't know who these individuals were. Fine. But what you said to the people that you didn't know who they were is the whole point. It's the whole point, Ellison. You know better, and you know that to be the truth, and you're caught.
And then the second thing is happening is, so the attorney is saying, my client is not going to be the only person to go down for this. So they want the politicians now. That's what happened when you capture someone that has committed an offense. Everybody wants a deal, so they start singing. So now you're going to have the criminals that got the money. They're going to start telling us what politicians help protect them.
So the U.S. Attorney in Minnesota said the scope of this fraud could exceed maybe $1 billion and could go as high as $9 billion. That's taxpayer money that criminals scammed the system, and they used that money, according to people involved. They pleaded guilty to using the money for luxury cars, for real estate, for jewelry, for vacations. Taxpayer.
This should make your blood boil, because as you and I, hardworking Americans, are trying to put food on our table, we have citizens from Somali and non-citizens from Somalia that are living in Minnesota under Tim Walz's watch, and they're just taking money out of the coffers of the taxpayers, the hard-working taxpayers of Minnesota and the hard-working taxpayers of America. But the key piece, and this is where it's going to get really interesting, is that we know that they can identify the low-level players. What they're now looking at are the politicians and the other enablers within the administration that allowed this pay-for-play, allegedly pay-for-play, to happen. That's a key piece, and that's breaking federal law. That's a big deal, and Donald Trump is all over it.
Dollars. And then you have the governor who says he's not going to run again, but the governor is complaining about ICE arrests, saying they're unreasonable and an unreasonable use of taxpayer dollars. So hypocritical. Listen to this. He says ridiculous. Nobody is fooled into thinking this buffoonery is a reasonable use of taxpayer dollars. It should not take 50 ICE agents to arrest a guy in a library.
This is pure distraction on Governor Tim Walz's part, and everybody knows it, because it's not buffoonery to be able to investigate fraud at a multi-billion-dollar level. This is the largest fraud recorded at the state level in U.S. history. So what Tim Walz is doing is completely distracting the story, right? And the attention that's on him at the moment, and on Ellison, the top cop at the moment. He's been calling people conspiracy theorists and racists and Nazis, and he's pointing to the White House, right, with Donald Trump. The truth of the matter is that his response and lack of response is part of the reason why the microscope's on him. He just is too dumb to not realize that.
You're insane. When you are a sanctuary city,
Exactly.
you're telling your cops you can't help anyone. So you have to make sure that you put thousands of people on the streets because you get no help for local law enforcement. So they have about 2,000, more than any other city, 2,000 on the streets. They've already made over 1,000 arrests, and they found some wanted criminals along the way. So so after they came out with a statement calling basically ICE agents and their actions buffoonery, we put that question to ICE Director Todd Lyons.
Not only is obviously we're focused on the fraud, right? But the mayor's right. There is a lot of work for us to do, and it's the fraud of immigration enforcement. So we have so many people that are in Minnesota right now that have violated immigration law by falsely claiming asylum, lying on their refugee status. There are so many individuals, not only Minnesota, across the United States, but we're focused on Minnesota because there's such a draw, because these individuals can go to these sanctuary jurisdictions and just hide in plain sight and get the support they need from elected officials. So we are going to focus on that. We are focusing on the people of Minnesota. We're going to make sure that the people who aren't supposed to be in Minnesota are no longer in Minnesota.
So this story is not going anywhere. And as you can see, it's a multi-pronged effort by Donald Trump. He's sending in HHS to go identify the illegal citizens that are here, some of which are criminals and some of which are caught up in this fraud scheme. But there's also a much bigger story, and that's what we're talking about here, which is the coordinated criminal fraud that's been taking place with or without Ilhan Omar, Keith Ellison, the AG, Amy Klobuchar, and Tim Walz's knowledge. Did they know? When did they know? Were they part of a play-for-pay scheme? It certainly is starting to look like it, because at this point, you can see that quote that we let off with. The Somalis in that undercover recording were specifically talking about two key points. Not only they want to send votes to the candidates that support them, but they want to send their money. And what money are they talking about? Not their personal funds. These are funds that they have siphoned off vis-a-vis the fraud that the state representatives knew about the whole time. So more to come on this story. If you've yet done so, please leave a comment down below, like this video, and subscribe for more videos just like this from America First Alerts. We'll see you in the next video.
Okay, let's go.